14 hours ago, something happened in deep space that no one can comfortably explain, and if the data holds, it may force us to rethink everything we assume about nature. It is February 27th, 2026, and the James Webb Space Telescope has just transmitted images of the object known as 3I Atlas that do not fit any known model of comet behavior. This is not about a slight course correction or an unusual gas plume. This is about structure. At exactly 8 UTC, NASA's Deep Space Network received confirmation that the debris cloud surrounding 3I Atlas was no longer behaving like dust drifting in a vacuum. Instead of spreading out randomly, instead of forming a messy tail as comets always do, the particles arranged themselves into a rigid, perfect equilateral triangle. Pause and picture what that means. This object is nearly 240 million kilometers away. In the vacuum of space, nature favors spheres, like planets shaped by gravity. It creates irregular, fractured bodies like asteroids. What it does not create are straight edges with internal angles precise to within 0.01 degrees. The statistical probability of a comet's coma forming a geometric shape of this precision has been calculated at 1 inch, 8.4 trillion. In practical scientific terms, that is zero. When physicists examine chaos, we expect disorder. What we see here is order that appears sustained, as if held in place by something unseen. NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center immediately classified the formation as a Class 1 anomaly, and the situation escalated quickly. The triangle was not frozen in space. Within hours, it began rotating, not drifting with solar wind, but actively resisting it. This was not a temporary pattern in dust. It was a maintained structure. The timeline matters. At 14 UTC on February 26th, the ALMA Observatory in Chile detected an unusually large spike in dust production around 3I Atlas. At first glance, that seemed ordinary. Comets heat up and release material as they approach the inner solar system. But by 1645 UTC, ALMA recorded behavior that contradicted fluid dynamics. Instead of solar wind pushing the ejected dust backward into a diffuse tail, the particles abruptly stopped. Imagine tons of silicate dust and ice crystals launched at 400 meters per second, appearing to strike an invisible barrier. Instead of dispersing, they began accumulating at 3 precise points in space, each equidistant from the nucleus. NASA cross-referenced this data with the James Webb Space Telescope. At 1830 UTC, Webb's NIRCam instrument confirmed what ALMA hinted at. The dust was not randomly clumping. It was being held in position. The 3 accumulation points formed a perfect equilateral triangle, with 3I Atlas positioned exactly at the geometric center. The measured distance from the center to each vertex was not approximate. It was exactly 12,000 kilometers in every direction. Physics gives us Kepler's laws for orbital motion and Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism. None of these predict that free-floating particles in deep space should ignore solar radiation pressure and lock themselves into rigid geometric symmetry. The likelihood of 3 independent dust jets firing simultaneously with identical force to create this configuration by chance is effectively zero. By 2115 UTC, the European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory reported something even more concerning. The mass of 3I Atlas had not changed, yet the gravitational field around it appeared distorted, as if the object were 10 times more massive than calculations indicated. Space itself was bending more than it should. That suggests a localized field, a containment mechanism. To understand the implication, consider cymatics, where sand poured on a vibrating metal plate forms geometric patterns due to sound frequencies. What we are observing around 3I Atlas resembles a cosmic-scale cymatic pattern. For such a structure to hold in space, there must be a frequency sustaining it, and just hours later, that frequency was detected. At 23 UTC, the Deep Space Network antenna in Canberra, Australia, registered a low-frequency hum emanating from the center of the triangular formation. This was not background static or random cosmic interference. The signal was steady, rhythmic, and consistent with a carrier wave. In other words, it was structured. When engineers isolated the frequency and filtered out known sources, the emission remained intact, originating precisely from the geometric center of the dust triangle. At this point, the scientific community shifted from curiosity to caution. Spectral analysis of the dust cloud revealed something equally unexpected. The James Webb Spectrometer detected unusually high concentrations of ionized heavy metals embedded within the structure, including iridium and osmium. These elements are rare in cometary environments, especially in such organized distribution. Cometary comas are composed mostly of water ice, carbon dioxide, methane, and simple silicates. They do not naturally display elevated levels of refined heavy metals arranged in symmetrical geometry. The presence of these materials suggests selective concentration, not random aggregation. At 2 UTC on February 27th, the triangle began rotating independently of the comet nucleus. It was not passively orbiting, it was spinning around the object at approximately 400 meters per second. As rotational velocity increased, the signal strength of the carrier wave amplified by 400%. The geometry remained intact despite centrifugal forces that should have dispersed it. Instead of destabilizing, the structure tightened. By 4:30 UTC, analysts determined the direction of the emission beam. It was not pointed toward Earth. It was not directed at the Sunday. The beam was aligned with Saturn. 2 minutes after the beam reached the Saturnian system, something occurred that expanded the anomaly from theoretical curiosity to physical event. The beam did not strike Saturn directly. It intersected with Enceladus, one of Saturn's icy moons, known for its subsurface ocean and cryovolcanic geysers. At 4:32 UTC, every major geyser along Enceladus's south polar region erupted simultaneously. Normally, these plumes are sporadic and driven by tidal stresses. Coordinated eruption on this scale has never been observed. The energy required to trigger a synchronized event of that magnitude has been calculated at approximately 14.5 terawatts. That is, more energy than humanity consumes annually. Yet the beam from 3I Atlas retained coherence across over 1 billion kilometers without measurable loss of intensity. Standard physics predicts that electromagnetic radiation obeys the inverse square law. Energy disperses over distance. This beam did not. It remained tightly focused. The only theoretical explanation consistent with this behavior is guided propagation, potentially through space-time manipulation. In practical terms, the signal did not spread through normal space. It appears to have tunneled. At 6 UTC, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory conducted a topological analysis of the rotating structure using pattern recognition algorithms. The artificial intelligence output did not classify the shape as a simple triangle. Instead, it identified the formation as a two-dimensional projection of a tetrahedron. In higher dimensional modeling, a four-dimensional object intersecting three-dimensional space can appear as shifting geometric slices. The AI assessment suggests that what we are observing may be a cross-section of a larger, partially hidden structure. This interpretation aligns with theoretical research published in 2019 Inch's Physical Review Letters, which proposed that stabilizing a wormhole throat would require a tetrahedral configuration of exotic matter. At the time, this remained mathematical speculation. Now, a structure with matching geometry is physically manifesting within our solar system. Thermal imaging from Webb's MIRI instrument introduced another anomaly. While ambient comet temperatures in deep space averaged near -200 degrees Celsius, the edges of the triangle measured approximately 4,000 Kelvin. That is comparable to stellar surface temperatures. Yet the interior ice remained intact. Heat was confined strictly to the perimeter, suggesting magnetic or plasma containment. This was no longer behaving like ice and dust. It was behaving like engineered plasma held in lattice form. As rotational velocity exceeded 800 meters per second, centrifugal force calculations predicted structural collapse. Instead, luminosity intensified. At 7:45 UTC, a neutrino burst was detected from the center of the structure. Unlike photons, neutrinos rarely interact with matter. This burst did not resemble solar background activity. It arrived in pulses structured in prime number intervals. In the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, prime numbers are considered a universal mathematical signature. Nature does not generate prime-numbered sequences spontaneously, intelligence does. At this stage, the natural hypothesis was no longer statistically viable, and then the sequence stopped. Silence followed for 3 full minutes. What happened next altered the scale of the anomaly entirely. The silence lasted exactly 3 minutes. During that interval, all emissions ceased. No carrier wave, no neutrino pulses, no detectable energy output. Analysts initially suspected system malfunction or structural collapse. But at 8 UTC, the James Webb Space Telescope captured a single frame that forced a reassessment. The triangular structure inverted, the luminous edges folded inward, and the bright plasma perimeter flipped orientation. What replaced the geometric center was not light, not debris, but absence, a perfect void. No background stars were visible through it. No infrared radiation escaped. It was not shadow, it was occlusion of space itself. At 8 hours 3 minutes and 14 seconds UTC, gravitational wave detectors on Earth registered a strain event. The Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, LIGO, recorded simultaneous disturbances in Washington and Louisiana. Gravitational waves are typically produced by cataclysmic events such as black hole mergers billions of light years away. This wave originated inside our own solar system. Its magnitude exceeded normal background fluctuations by several orders. Most critically, it was directional. It did not radiate outward in a sphere. It formed a focused front aimed directly at the Sunday, a localized object approximately 300 million kilometers away had generated a gravitational wave detectable by instruments designed to measure cosmic collisions. In conventional physics, generating such a wave would require mass-energy densities approaching singularity conditions. 3. I-Atlas did not collapse. It remained intact. At 8:25 UTC, the European Space Agency took the unprecedented step of taking the Gaia Observatory offline. In a decade of continuous operation, Gaia had never been withdrawn from public data feeds during active observation. This action signaled the seriousness of the event. The gravitational wave pulse reached the Sunday 45 minutes later. The Solar Dynamics Observatory recorded a phenomenon not documented in 4 billion years of solar history. The sun did not flare. It did not eject a coronal mass ejection. Instead, the entire corona began oscillating in harmonic synchronization with the original frequency emitted by 3I Atlas. For 12 seconds, magnetic field lines across the solar surface locked into a standing wave pattern. The oscillation frequency matched the carrier wave previously detected from the triangle. Independent confirmation came from SOHO and the Parker Solar Probe. 3 separate instruments observed identical vibrational harmonics. In theoretical astrophysics, a Type II civilization is defined as one capable of harnessing the energy output of its star. Interaction with stellar magnetic fields is a prerequisite for such control. The gravitational pulse from 3I Atlas functioned less like a message and more like a protocol handshake. Immediately following the solar oscillation event, the rotational movement of the triangular structure ceased entirely. 3I Atlas reoriented its trajectory toward the solar North Pole. Orbital calculations indicate that at its current acceleration, it will reach perihelion in approximately 4 hours. Every major observatory on Earth is now tracking the object continuously. Data bandwidth from the Deep Space Network has been prioritized exclusively for this target. The structure remains geometrically intact, though curvature has increased along its edges. The triangle is transitioning toward a non-Euclidean configuration. The original question was whether the phenomenon was natural. That question no longer carries statistical support. The revised question is intent. Why initiate contact with Saturn through Enceladus? Why transmit prime numbers? Why direct a gravitational pulse at the Sun? If the solar oscillation represented acknowledgement, then 3I Atlas has established a two-way exchange with our star. And now, as perihelion approaches, the object is accelerating. The next 4 hours will determine whether this is a demonstration, a calibration, or activation of something far more consequential. Observatories are aligned, the Sun is responding, and the geometry around 3I Atlas continues to evolve. As perihelion approached, tension across the global scientific community intensified. Every available telescope, sensor array, and deep space antenna was locked onto 3I Atlas. The object was no longer drifting inward as a passive traveler from interstellar space. It was accelerating in a controlled vector directly toward the solar North Pole. Orbital simulations confirmed that gravitational influence alone could not account for the increase in velocity. Something was propelling it. At 9:10 UTC, updated telemetry from the Deep Space Network showed that the triangular structure had begun another transformation. The once sharp 60-degree angles were softening. The edges were curving inward, and the formation was folding along axes that did not align with standard three-dimensional geometry. Analysts at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory described it as a transition from Euclidean to non-Euclidean curvature. In practical terms, the structure appeared to be bending space locally around it. Thermal readings continued to defy expectation. The outer arcs of the formation sustained temperatures exceeding 4,000 Kelvin, yet the internal core remained near cryogenic levels. This temperature differential persisted without energy leakage. Plasma containment fields of this magnitude exceed anything humanity has engineered. The configuration resembled a magnetic bottle on a cosmic scale. At 9:42 UTC, neutrino detectors recorded a new sequence. Unlike the previous prime number bursts, this emission followed a geometric progression pattern. The intervals doubled consistently: 2, 4, 8, 16. The pulses were not random, they were systematic. The shift from prime number signaling to exponential intervals suggested progression rather than introduction. Many in the field interpreted the prime numbers as identification. The geometric progression appeared more like synchronization. Meanwhile, solar activity remained elevated. The Solar Dynamics Observatory reported continued oscillatory patterns along high-latitude magnetic lines. The Sun was not flaring chaotically. It was responding rhythmically. Magnetic field topology maps indicated temporary realignment along a tetrahedral symmetry consistent with the structure observed around 3I Atlas. At 10:15 UTC, gravitational wave monitors recorded microvariations in local spacetime curvature between the object and the Sunday. These were not large-scale pulses like the initial event. They were subtle, sustained fluctuation. The data suggested a temporary corridor of altered gravitational density connecting the two bodies. In theoretical frameworks, such a corridor would resemble a stabilized energy channel. Whether this represented energy transfer, information exchange, or calibration remained unclear. However, power metrics indicated that the object was drawing measurable solar magnetic flux. If this interpretation holds, then 3I Atlas is not simply signaling our star, it is interfacing with it. By 10:58 UTC, the structure had fully transitioned from triangular geometry into a curved tetrahedral lattice. The plasma arcs intersected at 4 vertices, though only 3 were visible from Earth's perspective. Modeling confirmed that a portion of the structure extended beyond conventional spatial projection, consistent with higher dimensional intersection theory. Acceleration increased again. Observers noted that the object's brightness rose steadily as perihelion neared. It was not reflecting sunlight alone, it was generating internal luminosity. Radiation spectra revealed coherent energy emissions aligned precisely with solar magnetic flux frequencies. At 11:30 UTC, 3.5 hours from perihelion, all systems were stable but escalating. The neutrino progression ceased. The gravitational corridor remained. Solar oscillations intensified in amplitude, but not chaos. The global question shifted from whether activation would occur to what activation would entail. If 3I Atlas has successfully established a gravitational and magnetic interface with the Sun, then perihelion may not be a simple orbital milestone. It may represent the completion of a cycle. Every observatory is recording at maximum resolution. Every agency has suspended secondary operations. And as the object closes the final millions of kilometers, one possibility is becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. We are witnessing not arrival, but ignition. At 12:04 UTC, with less than 2 hours remaining before perihelion, a measurable spike in solar magnetic flux was detected across multiple observatories. The spike did not originate from a flare or coronal mass ejection. Instead, it aligned precisely with the gravitational corridor linking 3I Atlas to the solar North Pole. For the first time, energy appeared to be moving bidirectionally. Spectrographic analysis showed that the plasma arcs of the tetrahedral lattice were modulating in intensity in direct correlation with solar magnetic resonance frequencies. This was not passive absorption. It was active tuning. The structure was adjusting itself to the Sun's oscillatory pattern. At 12:27 UTC, a secondary gravitational ripple emanated from the object. Unlike the initial focused wave, this ripple was contained within the corridor region. LIGO detected only faint echoes, suggesting the energy remained localized. Calculations indicated controlled release rather than explosive output. The Solar Dynamics Observatory recorded a sudden stabilization in coronal oscillations. Magnetic field lines that had been vibrating entered a synchronized equilibrium state. For 9 seconds, the Sun's outer atmosphere held a symmetrical magnetic lattice rarely observed outside of computer simulations. In astrophysical terms, this was equivalent to achieving harmonic lock. As perihelion drew closer, the object's acceleration plateaued. It was no longer gaining speed. Instead, its trajectory refined. Micro-adjustments kept it precisely aligned with the solar north axis. This degree of navigational control at interplanetary velocity exceeds all current propulsion technologies known to humanity. At 1310 UTC, radiation monitors on Earth recorded a modest but detectable increase in high-energy particle flux. The increase was within safe levels but statistically significant. The particle composition matched signatures previously detected within the plasma arcs of 3I Atlas. Some form of controlled discharge was occurring. Simultaneously, neutrino detectors registered a final short burst. The sequence returned to prime intervals, but at higher energy density than the original transmission. It lasted only seconds. Then it stopped. Perihelion occurred at 1359 UTC. At the exact moment of closest approach, the tetrahedral lattice expanded outward by approximately 3% before collapsing inward. There was no explosion, no solar flare, no shock wave detectable beyond the gravitational corridor. Instead, solar magnetic field readings spiked and then stabilized at slightly elevated baseline levels. The object did not disintegrate. It did not plunge into the sundae. It executed a precise arc maneuver, slingshotting around the solar North Pole while maintaining structural integrity. As it exited perihelion, its velocity increased beyond pre-approach measurements. The gravitational corridor dissipated gradually over the next 7 minutes. Solar oscillations returned to historical norms. However, magnetometer data indicated a subtle but permanent alteration in solar field alignment at high latitudes. This suggests that the interaction was not purely observational. It left an imprint. By 1420 UTC, the tetrahedral lattice began retracting, plasma arcs condensed inward, luminosity diminished. The structure transitioned back toward triangular geometry, but this time the angles were slightly altered from the original 60-degree configuration. The difference was small. The implication was not. The object was departing the Sun not as it arrived, but modified. As it accelerated outward on a new trajectory toward the outer solar system, its vector was no longer random. It was aligned along a path intersecting Jupiter's orbital plane. Data transmission continues. The signal strength is lower, but still measurable. Whatever calibration occurred at perihelion appears complete. The Sun remains stable. Earth remains unaffected. Yet something fundamental has shifted. We are no longer observing an anomaly. We are observing a system that has completed a function. As 3I Atlas moves away from the inner solar system, the final data continues to raise serious questions. Its outbound velocity is higher than expected, and the increase cannot be fully explained by solar gravity alone. There is residual energy in its trajectory that current physics does not account for. This was not a simple slingshot maneuver. Tracking confirms the object is now aligned toward Jupiter's orbital plane. Whether this is coincidence or part of a continued sequence remains unknown. What we do know is that the tetrahedral plasma structure has not completely collapsed. Faint geometric symmetry remains around the nucleus, along with elevated levels of ionized heavy metals that have not dispersed like ordinary comet material. Solar monitoring teams are still analyzing the aftermath of the interaction. Data from multiple observatories shows that the Sun's magnetic field at high latitudes shifted slightly during the event and has not returned to its previous baseline. The change is small but permanent within measurement precision. In astrophysics, permanent alterations in stellar magnetic alignment do not occur without significant external influence. The communication sequence itself remains one of the strongest indicators of intentional design. Prime number neutrino bursts, exponential synchronization pulses, a directional gravitational wave, and a harmonic solar response form a pattern too structured to dismiss as random cosmic behavior. In the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, mathematics is considered universal. Prime numbers are not noise, they are signal. If this object represents advanced engineering, its behavior was precise and controlled. It did not attack, it did not destabilize. It initiated contact, synchronized with a star, completed a measurable sequence, and departed. The statistical probability of these combined events occurring naturally perfect geometric plasma containment, gravitational wave directionality, synchronized eruption on Enceladus, solar harmonic locking, and controlled perihelion maneuver is effectively zero under current models. This leaves only two possibilities. Either our understanding of physics is deeply incomplete, or we have witnessed technological activity on a stellar scale. No official agency has declared this extraterrestrial engineering. Verification continues. Independent data from multiple continents confirms the timeline and measurements. Caution remains the official stance. But one conclusion stands firm. 3I, Atlas did not behave like a comet. It behaved like a system executing a defined protocol. It arrived with structure. It interacted with precision. It left on a calculated trajectory. And as it moves toward the outer solar system, one question lingers: was this a test, a survey, or the first step in something larger? If you want to follow every development as new data emerges, subscribe now and stay with this channel. The next signal may change everything we think we know about our place in the universe.